Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge. I'm Peter Robinson. Be sure to join us, by the way, on our new website, hoover.org/UK. hoover.org/UK. After working at the BBC, the Financial Times, and the London Times, Gerard Baker in 2009 joined the staff of the Wall Street Journal, where he now serves as Deputy Editor-in-Chief. Every morning, Jerry chairs the conference that decides what more than 2 million subscribers will read in the Journal the next morning. A former White House speechwriter for the first President Bush, Andrew Ferguson now serves as a senior editor at the Weekly Standard magazine and a columnist for Commentary magazine. Andy is the author, most recently, of Crazy You, One Dad's Crash Course in Getting His Kid into College. You did get Gillum into college, did you not?
Yes, I'm not sure if he's still there.
You've lost track. All right. Who's minding the Journal and the Standard while the two of you are in California, by the way?
Well, I can't speak for the Standard, but the Journal's in much better hands, actually. It's in the hands of the real editor, the editor-in-chief, Robert Thompson, who actually, I should say, more often than I do, chairs that morning meeting. But when he's not around, when he's doing far more important things, I'm there to carry the can.
All right. Segment one, everybody with a capital E. Two quotations. First quotation, UCLA political scientist Tim Grossclose in his book Left Turn, quote, "In a typical presidential election, only about 7% of Washington journalists vote for the Republican," close quote. Quotation number two, Andy Ferguson in Commentary magazine, quote, "Every Sunday night, I set my radio alarm clock so it will awaken me Monday morning to the sound of Cokie Roberts, the veteran analyst for NPR's Morning Edition. I count on her as a spinning weather vane whose little arrow, when it comes to rest, invariably points to whatever opinions are being adopted by our media elite in any given week. If she says it, everybody thinks it. Everybody with a capital E." Andy, why should there be an everybody with a capital E? Why is it the case that journalists are so overwhelmingly liberal?
Well, that's a question that journalists themselves don't ask themselves enough. I suspect it's a matter of temperament. People who lean to the right tend to be interested in things like commerce and making money and providing for their families above all and so on, whereas journalism attracts people whose priorities are slightly different, which is to make trouble, to expose wrongdoing, and so on, and all the other self-flattering things that we like to tell ourselves.
Jerry?
Yes, I think that's right, and I think it was ironic a year or two ago to read what a lot of people in the capital E, everyone world, were saying was a kind of epistemic closure. Remember another E? They talked about epistemic closure on the right, that there was this inability of conservatives to see anything beyond the narrow world of the kind of conservative mindset. And I think it's that epistemic closure that has captured to some extent so much of the media too. I think, but from the other side, from a liberal side, I agree with Andy. I think it is an issue of temperament and sensibility to some extent. It's if you want to do something, if you want to make money, and you want to actually achieve something, if you want to create something in the world, you probably don't go into journalism, not in any way to criticize journalists, but you do if you actually are going to do that, then you will probably choose something other than journalism.
All right. So what the two of you have agreed on in short order is that anybody who wants to mind his business, take care of his family, and make a little money does not go into journalism, and yet you both did. Andrew Ferguson, from Roshi to right-wing pundit. Explain yourself.
Well, the Roshi part didn't take. I did spend.
You were a lefty. You were a lefty in grad school, right?
I was, and I was a
Zen Buddhist.
Well, yeah, I tried. That didn't work out too well. I wanted to be.
Can you fail at being a Zen Buddhist? Did they throw you out? Or is there
if you don't answer that first koan, right. You are out the door. They did. I wanted to be one of the Beatles, but they weren't hiring. There was just a number of things I tried to do, and I was actually told by a placement counselor at Occidental College, where I went to school. My senior year, she looked at me with deep, soulful eyes and said, "You understand, don't you, that you have no marketable skills whatsoever in journalism?" What else was I going to do?
Well, okay, fine. amusing, but really, what are you doing as a journalist, really?
Well,
in other words, we've talked about the 93% are in some way easy to understand. They're all liberals and they're all journalists and they're temperamental troublemakers. We understand that, right? But now you have to explain the 7%, including yourselves.
Well,
in your case, partly it's a love of language, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I wanted to be, I'm
you wanted to be a writer rather than a journalist.
Yeah,
is that so?
yeah, and again, they weren't hiring, so journalism is what's left to somebody who. And I would disagree with Jerry about this part. There is a creative impulse in journalism which is quite satisfying, which is you actually do create something outside yourself. It's nice to know at the end of a day or whenever your deadline is that there is now something in the world, a story, an article, an essay, whatever, that wasn't there before. And the creative impulse that I think businessmen have is also shared by journalists too. I don't think journalists understand that businessmen also have a creative impulse.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Jerry, we should stipulate that in your current job, you're not professionally conservative. You're in charge of a straight news op. You're in charge of the news hole at the Wall Street Journal, not the editorial or opinion pages. But still, your political predilections are no secret because you've been in journalism for many years and have written under your own byline. As a young man, you once told me you visited both New York and Moscow. Explain that, would you please? And then give us go from New York to Moscow to journalism.
Well,
what
let me just
doing in this trade.
Well, first, I mean, I could say cynically that I started off actually as in economics and banking. When I left university almost 30 years ago, I decided I wanted, for some reason, to go into banking because I thought I was fascinated by finance and by markets, and basically I was no good at it. I mean, I was temporarily.
So what we have here is a failed banker and a failed Buddhist.
Yeah, exactly. The story of my kind of revelation, I suppose, sort of Damascene revelation. Yeah, in the 1980s, I mean, I grew up, as most people in Britain did, in that sort of culture that was essentially social democratic, socialist, and one that I think actually viewed the struggle of the Cold War, although we were obviously, the left was still sympathetic, thankfully, to the views, to the position, to the objectives of the West. There was certainly a willingness to see the possibility that socialism, if not communism, but socialism was at least, there was something idealistic and attractive about it. And I think a lot of people...
And you were thinking these thoughts even as the Prime Minister is Margaret Thatcher?
Yes, absolutely, especially as the Prime Minister. I'm afraid I'm...
You're reacting against her as a student.
I was, absolutely, yes. Like everybody, I went on those demonstrations. One of my favourites was a sign up in the college junior common room which said March in London, and somebody had written underneath April in Moscow. And we so there was, that was the climate of the times very much. In the 1980s, after I left, in fact, while I was still working actually for the central bank in the UK, I took a trip to the Soviet. In the space of 6 months, I went to both the Soviet Union and the United States for the first time. The United States fortunately lasted rather longer than the Soviet Union, and I went to Moscow and New York in the space of 6 months. And the contrast. Now, I was already on what people like to call a kind of an intellectual journey by that stage. I wasn't quite the radical firebrand I'd been in my youth, but I was still interested. I was still interested to see whether there was something to this idealistic dispensation that the Soviet Union, at least to an outsider, perhaps seemed, even in its completely flawed practice, it seemed to offer. I went and I was completely appalled. I was, as I think anybody outsider who went there saw the Soviet Union, saw that it was
nasty place,
grey, uniform. There's a lovely story actually of a very left-wing English miners, the coal miners union leader Arthur Scargill, who actually took a trip around about the same time to Bulgaria, and had the most appalling time. This was someone who was more or less a avowed Marxist.
I think, as I recall, Scargill to this day, he's still around, and to this day he still calls himself a Marxist.
he went and went to Bulgaria and spent 3 days there getting awful food and terrible service and all the sort of stuff that you come to expect, and getting shouted at and sort of generally abused by the workers' paradise. And at the end of his trip, he gave a little press conference where he said, "To be honest with you, if this is socialism, you can stick it." And that sort of was my reaction to the Soviet Union. Then about 6 months later, I went to New York, and the contrast was pretty striking. This was not a great time, by the way, in the United States. It was the late 80s as things were starting to slow. Well, the Reagan boom was, I suppose, still going on, but the economy was starting to slow down. But I was just overwhelmed by the diversity, by the freedom, by the sense of opportunity and hope. It was that, perhaps more than anything, that contrast between that sense of opportunity and hope that you saw in the United States versus the utter despair and misery of the Soviet Union. I thought, I think one of these works and one doesn't.